All right, I see that we have Ben Franklin's Director of College Counseling, Miss Allison Bruno, with us this evening. Ms. Bruno, would you like to address your seniors and parents before we get started?
Yes, hello, thank you for attending the meeting tonight. Myself and Ms. Wilson's also logging on right now. And, we're going to go over the FAFSA completion followed by CSS Profile. So it'll probably be like, what, about an hour or so?
Yes, we've allotted about an hour, although we are, happy to stay on and answer questions as long as there are people that do still have questions.
Okay. All right.
Do you have a FAFSA completion deadline at Ben Franklin?
We don't have a deadline, though we are tracking when the FAFSA is completed, that's entered into our system. And then at the end of the school year, our data manager is going to be, getting all the information together to send over to LOFSA for TOPS. So, we would recommend, definitely getting it done before March 1st, but there's no deadline, but it's good to get it in. The colleges have different deadlines. So some of the colleges, it may be January and maybe February that you have to have it done by.
Very good. Okay, we still have students entering, but I'm going to go ahead and get started so we won't be behind our schedule. Now, as I mentioned, oops, I'm going to go back. I'm Ann Carmichael, and I'm presenting this evening on behalf of LELA. LELA is Louisiana's nonprofit resource for FAFSA completion and college access. And I'm going to be covering the student financial aid process. If you have any questions, please drop those in the Zoom chat box. And then, as I mentioned, Mr. Roland Keller from Tulane University is going to be addressing them at the end of the presentation. Now, because college can be expensive, it is time to start making yourself aware of and begin preparing for the costs of pursuing a post-secondary education. And those costs are going to include your equipment, books and supplies, personal expenses like money to pay your phone bill, to do your laundry, fuel for your car, any food purchases that you might need to make outside of your meal plan, room and board, which could be your dorm room or an apartment if you're living off campus.
Ms. Carmichael, is it okay if we record this if it's not recording already?
Yes, we are recording. So, and I'll be happy to send the recording over to you after the presentation as well. You're very welcome. So tuition and fees, which are the largest majority of your expense. And of course, your tuition is going to be stated on each college's website, but you also need to make yourself aware that there are other fees like parking, library, technology, and athletic fees that will be assessed on campus. But the good news is that financial aid is available from the U.S. Department of Education, the state of Louisiana, in the form of the TOPS scholarship, your college or career school, and then nonprofit and private organizations like LELA. In 2020, more than $150 billion in federal student aid was awarded. And we just want to make sure that the class of 2022 receives their portion. Types of federal student aid include the federal Pell Grant, the federal Supplemental Education Opportunity Grant, the Teacher Educational Assistance for College and Higher Education Grant, or TEACH grant, the Iraq and Afghanistan Service Grant, federal work study, and direct subsidized, unsubsidized, and PLUS loans. Federal student aid grants are a form of federal financial aid that does not have to be repaid. So you never want to turn down a grant offer from your college or university. And the federal grant family includes Pell Grants for undergraduates with financial need, FSEOGs for undergraduates with exceptional financial need, service grants for students of military parents who died defending the country following 9/11, and teach grants for students pursuing a teaching career. The Federal Work Study Program provides part-time jobs to help students pay for their education expenses. So when you answer that FAFSA question about federal work study, and you say yes, the financial aid office will begin to consider you for available jobs on their campus. Now, your earnings from those jobs will be paid directly to you, the student, and should be used to pay for your college expenses. These jobs look great on your first professional resume. Now, no one wants to have to borrow, but if you cannot complete your college degree without student loans, then they are a good investment. The important thing to remember is to borrow only what you need to complete your education. And it's also important to understand the types of loans that you might be offered. There's the direct subsidized loan. These loans are based on financial need, and no interest is going to be charged until you graduate or cease to attend. These are also known as need-based loans. On the other hand, almost everyone is eligible for direct unsubsidized loans, regardless of your financial need. But you do need to keep in mind that interest is going to begin to accrue on this type of loan, the unsubsidized loan, once it's fully dispersed and then throughout the life of the loan. So you can see that there is a difference between the direct subsidized and unsubsidized loan. When you do receive your student aid offer, always accept the subsidized loan portion first. And you can remember this by telling yourself that the you in unsubsidized means that you always pay the interest. If you do make the decision to accept loans, you always want to accept the federal student loans first, because payments aren't due until you graduate or cease to attend. The interest rate is fixed at a lower rate and no credit check is required. On the other hand, you need to be very cautious when accepting any private loan offer because in some instances, payments might be required while you're still in school. The interest rate might be variable and often it's much higher, and they almost always require a cosigner. Now, you can use all federal student aid at public and private four-year colleges, community colleges, career and the technical schools to take part-time classes and then online studies as well. And all federal student aid and most institutional and private aid is contingent upon completion of the free application for federal student aid, or the FAFSA, which launches on October 1st of every year. So that deadline, that open date, start date is coming up pretty soon. So you want to mark your calendar for that. You need to make sure that you're paying close attention to your FAFSA deadlines. Your colleges may have deadlines to submit your FAFSA. The top scholarship is contingent upon completion of your FAFSA. And federal student aid also has a deadline. So make sure that you make note of all of those deadlines and that you meet them. You'll want to begin the FAFSA process by collecting all of the documents that you're going to need to complete the form. If you do this, it should take no longer than about 30 minutes to submit your FAFSA. And those documents include the student and parents' social security cards, because you must report your name and number exactly as printed on your most recent card. Student and parents' 2020 federal income tax returns, if you filed one. If you don't have a copy of that tax return, now is a good time to go online and download a copy of it, or contact your tax preparer for a duplicate copy. You'll need the student and parents 2020 W-2s because there's information on these forms that might not be listed on your tax return. And then, of course, bank statements and any records of investments, because you need to report the balances of these accounts as of the date that you submit the FAFSA. Now, you want to begin by creating the Federal Student Aid ID. And as a matter of fact, you and your parent can complete this FSA ID process now, and you'll have a head start on the process. Sorry to be hesitant here. I'm still logging students into our meetings. Now, the FSA ID allows students and parents to identify themselves electronically when accessing all federal student aid websites. It consists of a unique username and a password that you and one of your parents is going to create, and it should reflect only your personal information. As I mentioned, each student and one of his parents needs to create this FSA ID. Now, quite often a student will use a parent's mobile phone as their alternate number or vice versa. And this is considered shared information. And if you share information, you're going to have trouble signing the FAFSA. So only use your personal information. Students, only use your personal email addresses. Once school's out, you'll no longer have access to that school email account, and federal student aid won't have any way of getting in touch with you. Parents, same thing. Please don't use your business email address. Please use your personal email address. Sometimes federal student aid communications do get caught up in a business's spam folders. Now, your username and password is your official electronic signature, and it's legally binding. So make sure you're recording it, but keeping it in a really safe place. You don't want to share it with anybody. You don't want to have anybody to have access to your financial aid information, but you do want to record it because you're going to use it every year that you're in college. If you don't have access to a computer when you're ready to get started on your FAFSA, you can always download the Fafsa Mobile app. It's called My Student Aid, and it's really easy to use to submit your FAFSA either on your mobile phone or any other mobile device with internet access. Or if you prefer, you can use the web-based version at fafsa.gov to submit your FAFSA. Now, if one of you, say the student prefers the mobile app, but mom or dad prefers to use the web-based version, that's fine, because all this information is going to be integrated into one form once you're ready to sign and submit. Now, when you log on to the FAFSA on October 1st, you're going to see that there's two options. You can complete this academic year's FAFSA or next academic year. Remember, you're going to be applying for financial aid for the 22-23 academic year. So that's the FAFSA that you need to complete. You'll begin by logging in with the student's FSA ID because the FAFSA is the student's application for federal student aid. The parent FSA ID will be used later on in the form if you choose to transfer your information from the IRS and drop it directly into the FAFSA. And it'll be used again for the parent to sign the FAFSA. There are 8 sections that need to be completed before submitting your FAFSA. And that information as I mentioned, all the information here must match exactly what's in your FSA ID. So as you're entering information into your FAFSA, make sure you're duplicating what you used in your ID. Those sections are going to include the student demographic section, where the student will report his social security number, name that's listed on his social security card, date of birth, personal email address, physical address, residency status, and gender. The school selection section will be used to report the student's high school, any colleges that he would like his Fafsa data to be sent to, and his housing plans on each of those campuses. Next, in the dependency status section, the students will be asked to answer 10 questions that will determine whether he is dependent or an independent student for Fafsa purposes. He'll be asked to report the number of dependents that are living in his household and his parents' education level to determine whether he is a first-generation college student. Next, you'll move on to the parent demographic section where the parents will report their social security numbers, their names, their marital status, and their email address. Then the parent and student financial sections where they will each report their working wages from 2020, any federal benefits that they've received, and the balances of their savings and investment accounts. And then it's time to sign and submit the Fafsa. And once you do, you'll receive confirmation that that's been done. Now, as you move through the Fafsa, you're going to see a question mark beside each question. If you want further verification or clarification about what about how you should answer that question, you can always click on that question mark for some help and hints. There are hyperlinks provided within the form itself for maybe some financial aid terms or legal terms that you might not be familiar with. You can request a Fafsa online chat while you are completing your Fafsa. You can call Federal Student Aid or Leela's Fafsa helpline for assistance. But for this session, I'm only going to cover the most commonly asked Fafsa questions. If you do have one, you can always drop it in your Zoom chat box and we'll talk about it in a few minutes. Or if you want to talk to me independently, I'm going to provide you with my email address and a phone number, and we can talk after the presentation. Now, as the student must be a citizen or eligible non-citizen to complete a Fafsa. If you are not a citizen and you are curious to find out if you are an eligible non-citizen, this is one of the hyperlinks. You can see printed here, there are several options for students who are considered eligible non-citizens. So if you fall within one of these categories, you can submit your Fafsa. You will not be able to create a federal student aid ID, but you can complete your Fafsa and manually sign, print the signature page and send it on into federal student aid. Now, if you are a citizen or an eligible non-citizen, but your parents are not, that is fine. You will just enter zeros anywhere a parent's social security number is asked for. And then of course that parent will also print the signature page at the end of the Fafsa and the sign and submit section as sign the signature page and then mail it on in. Also, young men between the ages of 18 and 26, we've heard within the last few weeks that they no longer have to be registered with Selective Service. However, you're still going to see this question on the Fafsa itself. This is a question I'm going to leave for later for Roland or for Charmaine to answer because they are both in the financial aid business. Is this going to show up as a Fafsa error? We haven't seen the Fafsa itself yet, but we'll find out. We'll get the answers to that for you. Now, only the colleges that you list on the Fafsa in the school selection section will consider you for. Speaking about Roland Keller, there he is right there. So any schools that you list on your FAFSA are going to receive your FAFSA data. So federal student aid is not just going to release all of your personal and financial information to every school around the country. You have to give them permission to do that. So you want to make sure that you are adding all of the schools that you're considering. Now, even if you haven't applied to those schools yet, it's okay to go ahead and add them to your FAFSA. They usually hold on to that information until you applied and perhaps even been admitted to their college, and then they'll pull down your FAFSA information and begin working on a financial aid offer for you. Now you can add up to 10 colleges at a time. If you are planning to apply to more than 10, there are instructions on this page on how to do that. If you need help, feel free to call me on Leela's FAFSA helpline, and I'll be happy to help you get through that as well. Now, to determine whether a student is dependent or independent for FAFSA purposes, these are the 10 questions that the students will consider. Remember that they're asking this of the student. Will you be 24 or older by January 1st of the school year for which you're applying for financial aid? Are you married or separated but not divorced? Will you be working on a graduate degree? Do you have children who receive more than half of their support from you? Do you have dependents other than children or a spouse who live with you and receive more than half of their support from you? Are you currently serving on active duty in the U.S. Armed Forces for purposes other than training? And if you all are going to boot camp after graduation, that's great. But remember that boot camp is considered training, so you still will not be able to answer yes to that question. Next, are you a veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces? At any time since you turned 13, were both of your parents deceased? Were you in foster care, or were you a ward or a dependent of the court? Are you an emancipated minor, or are you in legal guardianship as determined by a court? And remember that legal custody is not always considered legal guardianship. So make sure that you have your documentation with you when you are completing your FAFSA. Next, are you an unaccompanied youth who's homeless, or are you self-supporting and at risk of being homeless? Now, seniors, if you are in this situation and your school district has identified you as an unaccompanied youth, make sure that you request a copy of that documentation before you graduate. You possibly will have to provide it to the financial aid office when you go through the verification process. Now, if you can answer yes to just one of these questions and provide a legal document supporting this claim, then you're considered an independent student for FAFSA purposes, and you may not be required to provide parental information. Now, if you're not in legal guardianship and you live with grandparents or other relatives or neighbors or other persons,
I was sort of paying attention to it,
and they've not legally adopted you, you must still provide information about your legal parents. None of these other people that you happen to be living with, unless they've legally adopted you, should provide information on your FAFSA. Let me try to mute a couple of people. Hold on. All right. So I know this is always, we always receive questions about this situation. So if you have doubts about it, please feel free to call me on the FAFSA helpline and we can talk our way through it. Now, For FAFSA purposes, you're not considered an independent student simply because you file your own taxes or you've chosen to live alone and say you do support yourself. However, if you're in a unique situation, you can always contact your college financial aid counselor to discuss that situation with them. And the most commonly asked question that we receive is, which parent or parents do I report on the FAFSA? Now, the rule of thumb is that the parent or parents that you've lived with the longest in the past 12 months should be listed on your FAFSA. So if you live with both of your biological parents, then that's easy. You're going to list both of them in the parent section. However, if the parent that you lived with the longest in the past 12 months is either separated, divorced, or was never married, then you should list only that parent on the FAFSA, unless that parent is now remarried, and now you must include that step parent. In other words, federal student aid wants to know the financial standing of the household that the student has lived in the longest in the 12 months prior to the date that the FAFSA was submitted. Now, if you're identified as a dependent student, say you could not answer one of the prior 10 questions, but your parents refuse to provide information about themselves on your FAFSA, you can answer, I'm unable to provide information about my parents. You can state that you do not have a special circumstance, and you can go ahead and submit that FAFSA without parental information, but you must contact your college's financial aid offices to discuss that situation. Because if you don't, you're only going to be offered student loans, and you're only going to be offered that unsubsidized student loan. So remember that the FAFSA is only a vehicle to gather your demographic and financial information and provide it to the college financial aid office. Your college will make your aid offer. So make sure that you're communicating directly with your college financial aid counselor. And to expedite the processing of your federal student aid, the student and parents should use the IRS data retrieval tool to provide income information if they filed a 2020 federal income tax return. Using the IRS data retrieval tool can diminish your chances of being selected for verification by your college financial aid office. If you're having trouble using this tool, I'm happy to help you. You can call our FAFSA helpline, or you can call federal student aid directly. But some of the reasons that students and parents have trouble transferring their information have to do with accurate information on that FSA ID and making sure that that information is matching exactly what you've entered into the parent and student demographic sections. So if you choose not to use the tool, and that's your choice, you'll want to go ahead onto the IRS website and prepare to request a tax transcript, because most often your college financial aid offices are going to ask for that tax transcript if you do not use the data retrieval tool. Once you do, if you do choose to use the tool, you'll be taken directly into the IRS website, and you will see here that some information is already populated when you get in there. You just need to make sure that you grab your 2020 income tax return, the federal return, and you make sure that your name, address, your zip code, all the information is entered exactly as it's printed on your tax return. Even if your preparer perhaps has misspelled your name, or you've moved since you filed your 2020 income tax return, or I've even seen situations where street is abbreviated on the income tax return, and that's what the IRS wants to see, because they want to make sure that the person in their website is the person who filed that tax return. And then once you get past the financial section, it's almost time to sign and submit. But before you do that, please review your student aid report. This report is going to show you every question you were asked as you completed your FAFSA and your answer to it. So a review of the report ensures that the financial aid office receives the most accurate information so that they can quickly process your financial aid offer. Now, as I mentioned, the student and one of his parents will sign the FAFSA using their Fsa IDs. If you do submit your FAFSA without signatures, it's going to be considered incomplete, and you're going to hear from Federal Student Aid asking you to make those corrections. Once you press that submit button, you should automatically receive the FAFSA confirmation page. You'll find out the next steps that you need to take to complete the student financial aid process. You'll see a list of the colleges that are going to receive your FAFSA data. You can review your estimated expected family contribution and consider your financial aid estimates. But remember, everybody gets excited when they see the dollar amounts, but remember that each college financial aid office will have to verify the information that you've submitted, and they will be the ones that will determine your aid on their campus. Once your FAFSA is fully processed, at that time it's shared with your colleges, and then they will begin to identify any aid that you might be eligible to receive. If you want to add a school or change your contact information or make any other changes on your FAFSA once it is submitted, you can simply log back into your FAFSA, make those changes, but remember to sign and submit each time that a change is made. If your family situation has changed since 2020, and boy, do we know that this is going to happen quite a bit, especially in our state with all the different situations we've all been through since 2020. Be sure that, of course, you provide exactly what's listed on your 2020 income tax return. Go ahead and get it submitted, but then contact your financial aid office, because they can use their professional judgment to perhaps find some additional sources of funding for you. But it's your responsibility to contact them and let them know about your situation, because they're trying to determine your net price. And this is going to be done by subtracting any grants and scholarships that you're eligible for on their campus from your cost of attendance. That net price can be paid in cash or by accepting student loans to pay the balance. Your student financial aid offer should reflect the college's cost of attendance, any grants, scholarships, work study, or student loans that you've been offered. So you need to make sure that you're reading each of them carefully and that you're responding to any requests from them for additional information. And remember again that you're going to be receiving a separate financial aid offer from each of the schools that you've listed on your FAFSA. Some schools do require that you have been accepted for admission before they make their offer to you. So make sure you're getting those admissions applications completed as well. You'll want to accept your financial aid in this order: scholarships and grants first, because this is gift aid that does not have to be repaid. Next, federal work study, because you've earned that money and you don't have to pay it back. And then loans. Loans are borrowed money, and you will have to repay these most often with interest. We all know that scholarships are gifts that don't have to be repaid, and you can begin your search now. I'm sure many of you have already done so, so good for you. There are literally thousands of scholarships. They'll be offered by your colleges. your parents' employers, private companies, nonprofits, religious and professional groups, social organizations. Some are going to be based on academic achievement. There'll be merit-based scholarships. Some are based on financial need. A scholarship could cover the entire cost of your tuition, or it could be a one-time award of a few $100s. But either way, it's worth applying for, because winning these is going to reduce the cost of your education. And bottom line, that's going to reduce your student loan debt. Talk to your high school counselor, your financial aid counselors, perhaps even the admissions representatives know about scholarships on their campus. Leela, again, this year is offering a $1,000 FAFSA completion scholarship for Louisiana high school students who have completed the FAFSA, and a $1,000 Choose Louisiana scholarships for students attending a college in the state of Louisiana. You can grab the applications from our website at leela.org, or you can contact me directly and I'll be happy to send more information about that to you. For students or parents who need help paying for college after accepting all scholarships, grants, federal and state dollars, Leela does administer a nonprofit education loan program called Leela Choice. It's just for Louisiana residents, and you can find out more about that at leelachoice.org. And remember, to continue receiving federal student aid, you must complete the FAFSA every year that you're in college. Now, your questions are welcomed. Continue to drop those in the chat box, and we'll be happy to address those at the end of the presentation. But right now, I'm going to turn over the presentation to Ms. Charmaine Talbert from Southern University, and she is going to talk to you about the CSS profile. Let me make her the host, and I'll turn this over to her. All right, Charmaine, anytime you're.
Hey, yes, ma'am. So I'm looking to share my presentation. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, ma'am, I see it.
Yes. Okay, great. Can you see the entire screen now?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, so good evening again. My name is Charmaine Talbert, and I'll be discussing the CSS profile process. So we're going to discuss applying for financial aid, the what, the why, the how, and getting started, completing your CSS profile, when is the best time for you to do so, and common mistakes. So this may sound strange, but to apply for financial aid, you need to first apply for admissions.
I'm sorry, but actually, no, I'm not seeing your whole screen now.
Okay, let's see.
Yeah, I think it's just partial.
Okay, let me try again. Okay, can you see it now?
Yep, looks great.
Okay, great, thanks. All right, so to begin with the financial aid process, you do need to start by applying for admissions. So a financial aid office can offer you an estimate of your financial aid eligibility without you being accepted, but most offices will not make an official offer until you have been fully accepted to their institution. So the key is to make certain that you submit the right documents at the right time. So deadline is always the key. So just keep in mind that the 2022, 2023 FAFSA and CSS profile will be available on October the 1st, next week. So CSS stands for College Scholarship Service, and the profile is an institutional aid application. So rather than colleges have their own institutional aid applications, they work with College Board to develop the CSS profile. So you can complete one application and it's sent to all of the schools that you have listed. The CSS profile is used by many selective private colleges, as well as some public institutions. You should think about this application as a supplemental application to the FAFSA. So for student eligibility, you must always complete the FAFSA first if you want to be considered for Pell Grant and any federal loans. It's a definite must. You can only apply for federal aid using the FAFSA, but federal aid is often not enough to cover all of your educational expenses. So this is a way for many colleges to find additional information to see which one of their students could best use their institutional aid. So why do we use the CSS profile? Simply, the FAFSA doesn't ask enough questions for institutions to gauge how to, issue money to eligible students. The FAFSA is mostly trying to determine Pell Grant eligibility, whereas the CSS profile is trying to help institutions understand who need their college's money. To put this in perspective, the FAFSA is used to determine who gets a Pell Grant up to roughly $6,000, whereas colleges use the CSS profile and they can easily award amounts up to $60,000 or more, depending on the funding source they have available. So when looking to award the amount of money to a single student, you want to make certain that you understand the full financial picture of that student and their family. So this requires a deeper dive into their finances, which the CSS profile allows colleges to do. Colleges want to have a much broader look at families so they can understand who really needs the aid and to award that aid in a fair and consistent manner. And if students' parents are no longer together, that might even mean collecting CSS profiles from each of the students' parents. So why should a student complete the CSS profile? So we've talked about the what and the why, so let's talk about how. First, you need to make certain that your college requires the CSS profile. To do that, the best place to go to is the college's website, which has definitive information on application requirements and deadlines. There's also a list of institutions that use the CSS profile on the College Board website. If your college requires the CSS profile, the application can be found at cssprofile.org. As with the FAFSA, the CSS profile will require financial information from both the student, and in most cases, your parent. So we've discussed, again, the what and the why. So now let's talk about how. Okay, so I'm sorry. So to complete the CSS profile, again, you would go to cssprofile.org. This is how the website would look. And you could create a free account to go ahead and get the application process started. And in order for it to be free, there is a waiver process. So I will discuss that shortly. So how does a family complete the CSS profile? So the non-custodial parents, so that's the parents that's not necessarily living in your home, would need to complete a free account, as well as a custodial parents. So I do have the link available. So when you're creating a CSS account for parental use, the students would need to have their own separate account. So as I mentioned, there are some fee waivers available. So it would depend on your family's income. So if your family adjusted gross income is up to $100,000, you should qualify for the waiver. The student qualified for an SAT waiver would also meet the eligibility for this waiver. And a student that's an orphan or a ward of the court under the age of 24 also meets the eligibility. So if you don't meet the eligibility to receive the waiver, this is the cost for the CSS profile. So the custodial household, so that's the household in which the student lives, is $25 for the application, and this will cover the first college selected, and then it's $16 additionally for each college. For a non-custodial household, is a $25 flat fee. So to look at the CSS profile at a glance, it's a pretty comprehensive application that it will ask a lot of information to where it'll help institutions gauge how much money they could fairly and safely provide to all of the students within their institution. So getting started. So first, this is creating a profile. So when you go and you log in, anything that has the little red asterisk is a required field. So you would put in all of the required information, make certain that you have an accurate phone number, a unique email address, that your date of birth is correct, so that they can properly match you. So keep in mind that the student's name must be your legal name as listed on either your social security card or your alien registration card. You must also list your date of birth. And although you don't necessarily have to have the social security number, but if you have one, it must match the same social security number as listed on your FAFSA. So now this talks about the student status. So that's basically, if the student has any legal dependents of her own, if she's a veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces. Basically, this is like our dependency questions that are listed on the FAFSA. And so in answering the student status questions, it does delve a little bit more into the homeless questions. So there's 3 questions that are listed. If you indicate on the previous screen, Lexi is homeless or at the risk of becoming homeless, when you answer yes, these are the 3 questions that will pop up. And so you would have to fall into one of these 3 categories. So now we go into reporting the student's parental information. So this is a little bit different from the FAFSA. Normally with the FAFSA, you would list your custodial parent and their spouse. With the CSS profile, you can actually list up to 4 parents. So your living parents, deceased parents, current step parents, parents' current partner, legal guardian spouse. And so within this example, Lexi has reported her parents and their relationship to her. So once everyone is listed, you would click Save and Continue. So next, we're going to be entering in the residency information. So you would need to list the country where the student's parents live. Once you select it from the drop box, you would do Save and Continue. And we're not reporting the country of birth or the country of citizenship. It's where the parents live at the date of the application. So next you would go in and you're gonna be searching for your schools that you would like to have your CSS profile sent to. So remember, if you don't receive a waiver, the first school is included. After that, it's a $16 fee for each school that you're adding for that custodial household. So in selecting your colleges, if you search using a college name, you may get multiple results. Some colleges both have undergraduate and graduate programs. And when they do, it might be harder to pick the right college. Notice that each of these different colleges that's indicated whether the CSS profile is accepted or not. And you can also notice that only one of these colleges reports that the CSS profile is accepted from an undergraduate applicant. Look for this in your search results when you see that there's a college that have multiple schools listed or multiple programs. Notice also that the box you check to select your college is underneath your college, not above it. So please make certain that you take time and pick the right college to ensure that the right school is getting your CSS profile. So once you've selected your colleges, you'll be asked to report the status for each college. So you'll be listing where you are in the academic program that you're matriculating at. So for instance, for high school seniors, it seems simple to select first year undergraduate, never previously attended. But if a high school student is dually enrolled in college while attending high school, it may seem that the student should select first year, previously enrolled, or even second year. But neither of those would be correct. Students taking dual enrollment courses are not eligible for financial aid and are technically still considered to be in high school. So these students will still need to select first year undergraduate, never previously attended when you complete your CSS profile. So within this example, the student went in and she completed her academic section and she selected the colleges to receive her profile. Now she's providing her year for school for that particular aid year, including her student ID number if she has one, her housing plans, and her admission application status for each of the colleges listed. So if you don't know your college ID number, you would just leave it blank. And the colleges would have that once you get further in your application process. So keep in mind, you still have to list more information about your parents. So they'll ask additional questions about their income, their assets, and then other persons within the household. So the parents will have to go into detail, listing their income tax information that they file for the applicable aid year. So since she reported that her and her spouse has filed a 1040, you'll see questions that are asking information off of that particular tax document. You're going to also have to report information off of your W-2s. So for instance, the tax deferred pensions and retirement savings plans, there's a particular code in box 12 of your W-2 that lists whether or not you have it and how much. It's not always translated into your 1040. It's only whether or not it's you did like an early withdrawal that you're taxed on. So make certain that you have both your tax document, your 1040, 1048, or 1040EC, as well as your W-2s when you're completing this process. So then you can also do some income forecasting. So you can project for that new aid year, the income that you have that you're expected to receive. You're going to have to also report your fixed assets, land, furniture, equipment, buildings, and factories. So it's important that you have all that information available whenever you're going to complete this particular application. So now we're going to go into reporting the additional family members within a household. So any brothers, sisters, they would also need to be listed just like you would be completing the FAFSA. So here in this example, you would just click add dependent and you would list the person's name, their date of birth, and their relationship to the student. So even though the person is a dependent of the parent, you're listing the relationship to the student. And for each person that's listed, you're going to need to provide their status. So you're going to need to provide for that current aid year what grade level they're in and for the 8 year to come, the grade year that they're going to. You have to list whether or not they're in private school or whether it's public. So the student would need to also list whether or not they have any income currently. So if they're working a part-time job, if they're expecting any income, if you're, you're gonna have an internship or anything like that, as well as any assets that you may have. So in light of COVID, there has been some changes to the current CSS profile for, special circumstances consideration. So if you were impacted by COVID, there is a box to where you can, check that you were affected by the pandemic, and then you can go into detail. So once everything is done, you'll be able to see a snapshot of everything on the dashboard. It will show you when your application is being submitted, payments received, all of your colleges listed, everything at a glance with this particular CSS profile. So the application status section gives you up-to-date information on your application and provides, again, your payment receipt. All of your colleges and programs are listed in the colleges and programs section. You can check for important dates and links to the schools that's listed. And you can even add another school from your dashboard as well. So when's a good time to complete the CSS profile? So again, the CSS profile opens when the FAFSA opens October of each year. But you should check with the colleges that you're looking to enroll in. You need to check for their deadlines and let that drive your decisions. So if you have multiple colleges that you're looking at with multiple deadlines, your deadline is the earliest deadline. Every college will have its own deadline. Please keep that in mind. So if you pick the earliest one to meet, you'll have the deadlines covered for all of the rest of the schools. And then also don't try to submit your application at 11:59 p.m. on the last day. Always give yourself plenty of time to collect information for your schools and to deal with any unexpected issues. You do not want to miss any deadlines because waiting until the last minute could result in you, maybe missing out on scholarship opportunities. So here are some common mistakes that are seen when reviewing a CSS profile. So one, make certain that you're applying for the correct aid year. Most students who are seniors in high school in 2021, 2022 actually enroll in college for 2022, 2023. So that is going to also double as your financial aid application. So just keep that in mind for both the FAFSA and the CSS profile. Also, entering important information incorrectly. So you want to make certain that you're reporting the name and the social security number correctly, that is matching what's on the card, in order to be able to match the student properly. And then also be careful about reporting the parents' information as the student and vice versa. If the parents duplicate their income by reporting in both of the parents and the students' income sections, it'll make the family look like they are financially stronger than that is actually the case. So you can lose out on being eligible for need-based aid. So make certain you double check that. Also, entering a student's date of birth incorrectly. It's easy to transpose numbers, so just make certain you double check. Answering questions about the student's status incorrectly. Too often parents report that they have legal dependents or that they are veterans when the questions are really gauged towards the students. Make certain that you take time to read and understand the questions. And if you have any questions, you can always reach out to your college of choice. And then also going back to the dual enrollment example, even if you've taken classes as a dual enrollment while in high school, make certain that your status is that you've never attended college and it's your first year. Also, selecting a graduate school instead of a college's undergraduate program. Selecting the wrong college means that your CSS profile information is delivered to the wrong school, and it could mean that your application is significantly delayed. So always check carefully and make certain that you're sending your CSS profile to the college that accepts the CSS profile for undergraduate applicants. So here's some references and resources. So, again, to apply for the CSS profile, you will need to go to cssprofile.org. I also have the customer service information for College Board up. They do normally have a chat box, but it has been down. So you can definitely give them a call and also email them from their website. And so these are the financial aid presenters and panelists. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to turn it over to Roland Keller of Tulane University for the Q&A.
And Charmaine, while you're doing that, can you send me a copy of your presentation so I can share it with Ms. Bruno at Ben Franklin?
Yes, ma'am, of course.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I am Roland Keller Jr. I'm one of the assistant directors of financial aid at Tulane University. So I will be facilitating the question and answer session regarding the CSS profile. But before we get to the questions and answers, I would like to share some exciting news about the CSS profile for the 22-23 application cycle. So the 22-23 application cycle for the CSS profile will be free to students with family incomes up to $100,000. So if your family income is $100,000 or less, the CSS profile will be free for you to submit. So that's some exciting news that I wanted to share with everyone. So now we will get to the questions and answers. So does anyone have any question on the CSS profile?
Can you go over where we can get scholarships again?
You're talking about outside scholarships?
Kind of like any kind of scholarship.
Yeah, so there are a few different scholarships. So there are merit scholarships that you can apply for directly with the colleges or universities that you apply to. So let's say you apply to Tulane, you'll be automatically considered for a merit scholarship that's based on test score and GPA. There are outside scholarships with different organizations such as civic organizations, social organizations, your church, different businesses. There may be scholarships with them. One great source that you can check for outside scholarship is fastweb.com. So that's a good source. So there are merit scholarships, outside scholarships, also within the colleges and universities that you apply to. Then there may be athletic scholarships that you can apply for. So if you play a sport, football, basketball, or band, you may audition for one of those type of scholarships. So there are quite a few different scholarships that you can see. But if you want to look for outside scholarships, check with your church, check with local organizations in your community, but also check fastweb.com.
Yes, I also, is Ms. Bruno, I posted a scholarship list that I have that's dated up to deadlines in the end of December or the end of the year. And I also included a bunch of search engines that you can use to find scholarships.
Okay,
Classroom.
awesome. And if you want to, I have a business, it's Keller Education Consulting LLC, where I consult with students who want to go to college, college consulting. If you want to contact me, I have a scholarship list as well. So you can do that too. And I can help you find outside scholarships.
And this is Ms. Wilson. If I could just say real quick, that's also something we cover with the students during their senior conferences. We talk about scholarships as well. So if you haven't had that yet, you probably haven't had a chance to go over that yet.
I didn't catch where Ms. Bruno said she posted the information about scholarships.
Yes, I posted, if you go to Google Classroom, class of 2023 college counseling, there's a scholarships listed. It's under, if you look under the classwork, there's a heading for scholarships. I posted a list there the other day, And then there's another heading with a scholarship searching, and there's about 5 different search engines that are there.
And Fast Web is on there.
Awesome.
I'm going to ask Charmaine and Roland to provide their contact information in case you want to talk to them independently. And I'll provide mine as well.
So do we have any questions about the CSS profile?
I do. Do you
Okay.
mind clarifying if it's, sorry, if the CSS profile is required by certain schools or if it's just accepted by some schools as supplemental information?
Yeah, so many private research institutions such as Tulane have their own institutional need-based program. So at Tulane, we have an institutional need-based scholarship called Tulane Need-Based Scholarship. So we ask our students complete the FAFSA, which is the application for federal student aid, but also complete the CSS profile so that they can be considered for Tulane need-based scholarship. So many private schools, private research institutions will ask their students to complete the CSS profile. It's not mandatory, but we recommend it. Tulane is a high-cost institution, so students will need federal financial aid and Tulane need-based scholarship to finance their educational expenses at Tulane. So it's not required, but we recommend it.
Hey, this is Mr. Hoffmeister.
Mhm.
So for clarification, when we're filling out FAFSA and the CSS profile, we're logging in as the student and not the parent. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the parent and the student for the FAFSA, both the parent and the student will need to create their own FSA user ID and password.
Right, I understand that. But then when you fill it out though, are you filling it out from your parent ID or from the student's ID?
Well, when you log in, I recommend that the student uses their information, their FSA ID and password.
Okay, so it's driven more through the student than from the parent's ID.
Correct. And then any corrections that you do make to the FAFSA, make sure that you sign it, both student and parent, with that same FSA ID and password.
Right. Okay, just want to clarify that.
If you can think, this is Ann Carmichael. If you guys can think of anything that you would like to ask these two professionals, they have a lot of financial aid experience. This might be one of the few times you have access to them.
I would just recommend that you, at each college or university that you apply to, you will have your own assigned financial aid counselor. So we know that sometimes the financial aid process can be somewhat complex. So if you have any questions about the financial aid process, about the FAFSA, about the CSS profile, definitely reach out to that assigned financial aid counselor, and he or she will, help you regarding your request.
I have one more question. This is Emily Hammett. I've heard a lot of parents of kids who are already in college say things like, financial aid is always negotiable, that kind of thing. How true is that?
I wouldn't say, well, federal financial aid via the FAFSA and institutional need-based funds via the CSS profile, it's based on a standard methodology and it's really not negotiable. So, it's based on the family's financial needs. So based on all the data that you report on the FAFSA for the CSS profile. So based on your household size, based on your income, based on all the assets that you report, we plug that into our formula and we determine what your financial need is. And based on that, that's how much in federal and institutional need-based aid that you'll be eligible for. So based on federal and institutional need-based aid is not negotiable. With merit financial aid, maybe. So every time you apply to an institution, the student may be considered for a merit scholarship. So if you apply to Tulane, we're going to look at your test scores, your GPA to determine your eligibility for a merit scholarship. that may be negotiable. So for example, if you apply to Tulane with a 3.7 and a 24 initially, and then you take the ACT again and that ACT score goes up, you may say, hey, I have a higher ACT score, can I get a higher level of merit? So with merit scholarships, that may be negotiable, but with need-based aid is based on a specific formula and it's really not negotiable. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, there's a couple questions here that parents have just put in.
Mhm.
I think this is more though, I guess it's got to do with TOPS. I don't know if Anne wants to answer some of these, but there's one. Okay, here we go. For kids with divorced parents who essentially spend equal time, how does a tax return come into play? Should the parent who claims the dependent fill out the form?
Are we talking about on the FAFSA? On the FAFSA? Well, on the CSS profile is going to require both non-custodial and custodial parent. On the FAFSA, you're just looking at the custodial parent. So the custodial parent is the parent with whom the child lived with more for the previous 12 months. If the student lived with both parents equally, it would be the parent who provided the greater level of support. That parent should be reported on the FAFSA.
And then also you would need to keep in mind that if both of the parents are unmarried but living together on the FAFSA, you would still need to list both tax status. So both 1040s if they're unmarried and living together.
I have a question. If you have multiple kids in college at the same time, does that help you out?
Yes,
Well,
so what happens is when there are additional household members in college with the formulas, with both the federal and institutional formulas, it will protect much more of your income and assets, thus reducing your expected family contribution, which will increase need-based aid eligibility. But the opposite will work. Let's say next year, let's say the first year you report, hey, I have 4 people in the household, I have 3 in college. But let's say the sophomore year for the student, one of the students graduates. So the household size is now 4 and 2. So we have one less person that's not in college. So the formula will do the opposite. It won't protect as much income and assets that sophomore year. So you're going to see a reduction in need-based aid. So if you have additional household members in college, it's going to protect more of your income and assets, which will increase eligibility for need-based aid. But the opposite will occur when siblings graduate, when they're no longer in college.
Yeah, so I have twins entering at the same time, so.
Okay, so that's going to work perfectly. So much more of your income and assets will be protected, and you're going to be eligible for need-based aid. So you're going to be fine.
And
Yeah,
this is,
so I estimate what I think their tuition might be, or there's a calculation for that?
Well, at this point, one good tool that I recommend that students use is the net price calculator at the institutions that they are applying to. The net price calculator will give you an early estimate of financial aid and would also give you the net price at that institution. So at this point, I don't think that the colleges or universities can give you an offer just yet. So I just recommend that you use the net price calculator. That can give you an early gauge of financial aid eligibility and also the net price at that institution.
But the net price indicator, does it take into account you have more than one kid in college? Or?
Yes. So it's going to ask household information. You know, how many people in your household, how many in college. It's going to ask about your income and also assets. And that's going to give you an estimate of federal financial aid eligibility, but also institutional eligibility as well.
All right, but it'll take into account you may have multiple tuitions going on.
Yeah, so so if you have additional household members in college, the formula will automatically protect much more of your income and assets, which will make both students eligible for more in need-based funding.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Relatedly, if you have more than one student in or applying for college, is there anything unique you have to do when you file the FAFSA?
Just, well, on the FAFSA, just indicate, how many students will be in college. Now, if you're applying to a school such as Tulane or any other school that uses a CSS profile, we require that students verify the enrollment of those siblings in school. So if you apply to Tulane, you say, I have 2 additional siblings in college. Later on in the fall semester, we're going to require that you go to that school's, to your siblings, school's financial aid office to verify that they're enrolled in college. So on the FAFSA, all you have to do is report it. CSS profile report it, but if you're eligible for need-based funding and you have additional siblings in college, that school may require that you verify that those siblings are in college for the upcoming academic year.
And I would also like to interject, for those of you who are completing a FAFSA for multiple students within one academic year, complete the first FAFSA application, but have your documents ready for the second student, because on that confirmation page is the only time that you're able to start a new FAFSA, and they'll ask you, because you've reported you're going to have 2 students in college in the 22-23 academic year. Click on that link and your parent information will be automatically populated into a new FAFSA for that second student, and that will save you time in reporting your information again.
Okay, and I think we have a few questions in the chat. I'll try to get to those. So one question is, for kids with divorced parents who essentially spend equal time, how does the tax return come in play? I'm not sure what you mean by how does the tax return come in play, but as far as reporting the custodial parent on the FAFSA, you report the parent with whom the child lived with more throughout the previous 12 months. If the child lived with both parents equally, then you go to the parent who provided the greater support, the greater financial support. That parent will be the custodial parent on the FAFSA. Now on the CSS profile, you're going to list both parents. So the non-custodial parent and the custodial parent. I hope I answered that question. Then we have another question. Should we be working on the FAFSA and the CSS profile at the same time? Yes, I would recommend that you complete the FAFSA first because it's not that complex as the CSS profile. So complete the FAFSA first and then complete the CSS profile after you have completed the FAFSA. The next question is, so we should plan on need-based aid changing every school year, depending on tax return and dependents matriculated into college. So what I typically tell my families at Tulane University, if your income remains the same year to year, that financial aid package should remain the same year to year as well. But if that income fluctuates, then you're going to see the opposite in that financial aid package. So let's say the first year your income is $80,000. But then the next year, the sophomore year, the income goes up to $180,000. The sophomore year, you're going to see a definite decrease in that financial aid award. But let's say the sophomore year, the income reduces. So you're going to see an increase in the financial aid award. So the financial aid can change from year to year depending on the income. And also the financial aid award can change if the household size changes. So yes. But if you're a family whose income and household size remain the same from year to year, you can be sure that that financial aid package from year to year will be the same as well. Okay, so the next question, what about parents that are remarried? Are spouses and non-custodial parents both required to apply? So if the parents has remarried, the step parent is a parent and is required to be reported. So let's say you complete the FAFSA, you report the custodial parent, but the custodial parent is remarried. That step parent is required to be reported on the application. If you do the CSS profile and the non-custodial parent has remarried, that step parent is required to be reported. So the step parents are counted as parents and they are required to be reported on both the FAFSA and the CSS profile. So the next question, so it says, so both the parent and student needs to complete a profile just like the FAFSA. So you're doing one application for the FAFSA, one application for the CSS profile. But the FAFSA, both student and parent must create an Fsa Id.
I got a question about if you own like real estate,
Mhm.
how do you project the value of that real, what do they look at from you have to get an appraisal done or
Yeah, most yeah, because yeah, if you, let's say you own a piece of land or a building, if you have an appraisal, you should report that value on the CSS profile.
so if you don't have a recent appraisal, do you have to pay to have one done?
What I typically, I give my family some latitude at Tulane. So I know with homes, I'm not a homeowner, but I know with homes, I know that if you're in the parish, like the parish assessor's office will assess the home, and that assessment will have like the value of the home. I advise parents to use that if they don't have a recent appraisal.
Right.
So if you have some sort of assessment with the appraised value of your home or your real estate or your property, you can use that.
But
Yeah.
what if you're a partial owner of a home? Like my mother left a house to my two sisters and I.
So my question, so is the home in your, is it in your name?
It's actually in the name of a trust.
Yeah, so trusts are required to be reported. So if there's 3 owners, so your value will be 1/3.
Right.
Yeah,
I can just cut it. I can just divide it by 3.
I would just divide it by 3.
Okay, that's what I was thinking. Thanks.
Yep.
Now, for FAFSA purposes, you do not report the value of your home.
Correct.
You will only have to report the value of any rental properties that you have. I don't know about the CSS profile, Roland.
Yeah, so the CSS profile, we do look at home equity. So on the CSS profile, we're gonna ask you to report the value of your home and also the debt of your home as well.
So the rental properties is just rental income or the value of the property as well?
So if you have rental properties, we're gonna want the value of those properties reported on the CSS profile.
And I assume the rental income minus all the taxes and fees?
Yeah, well, that should be listed on your tax return.
Yeah.
So at Tulane, we require validation in addition to the CSS profile. So we don't require, we ask that students complete the FAFSA, complete the CSS profile, and we request the personal income tax return and also the business tax return if a family owns a business. So that should be listed on the tax return.
So I know this is getting complicated, but like 401ks that are pre-tax and annuities and stuff like that?
So on the CSS profile, the value of your retirement is required to be reported, but it is excluded from the methodology. So we see it, but we don't include it. We don't count it against you. We don't touch retirement. That's one thing we don't touch.
Oh, okay. So if you have a lot of your money in the 401k, it doesn't hurt you?
Well, if you report that you have a 401k in the amount of $1 million or whatever, is excluded. We'll see it, but is excluded from the methodology.
Oh, okay.
And I did see a question, where can I find my student's LASECID that needs to be used to start the TOPS application? I am not sure. Roland or Charmaine, are you sure do you know where that Louisiana Secure ID can be found, or do they need to contact the TOPS office?
I would recommend that they contact the TOPS office.
And I'm
Yeah.
gonna,
Business Kastner, I gave you the number today. You could try, just sent you a link though, and you can try calling the TOPS, you could call LAFSA and see if when you can get into the student hub, because that number I gave you today is the correct number though.
I'm gonna give you an email address for Scott Burke, who works with LOSFA, and he will be happy to get you that information.
Does anyone know when the student hub opens though for the class of 2022? Would it be open yet to start putting in those IDs?
I don't like to give out TOPS information because it does change from year to year. So I'm going to just ask you to contact Scott Burke or ask the parents to do that independently.
Okay, there you go.
And I do have one recommendation. Ms. Talbot talked about when to complete the CSS profile for the school that you're applying to. Specifically at Tulane, when you should complete the CSS profile would depend on how you're applying to Tulane, your applicant type. So if you're going to apply early decision, early action, or regular decision, that's going to determine when you submit the CSS profile. So you may want to look at how you're applying to these schools. Are you going to apply early decision, early action, regular admission? That's going to determine when you should complete the CSS profile. But the CSS profile does open up when the FAFSA opens up on October 1st.
So one last question. If you have so you have a rental property, right? And that's your most available liquid asset. Are they expecting you to liquidate that property?
Well, yeah, no. So because what I've heard many times at Tulane is from families, you know, do you want me to sell my home? Well, we don't want you to sell your home. We don't want you to liquidate assets, but your income and your assets, they help us determine your financial strength, your expected family contribution. So you hold these assets that are available to you that you can use to finance a college education. So all the data that you're reporting on the FAFSA and the CSS profile are helping us determine your financial strength. It is helping us to determine your expected family contribution. So we're not wanting you to liquidate those assets per se, but those assets that you hold, you know, can be used to help finance the education, but we don't want you to liquidate them.
But they can be used by the rental income. So FAFSA is really looking at cash flow, not really asset value.
Well, the CSS profile, we're looking at everything. I can tell you that. The CSS profile is to me and most opinions of financial aid administrators is a much more realistic determination of the expected family contribution of the measure of your financial strength, because we're looking at pretty much everything. We're looking at custodial parent, non-custodial parent, all assets, all income. With the CSS profile, if you're applying to a school that has their own institutional need-based aid programs, it's going to be definitely a much more complex review of your financial details if you're applying to a school who has the CSS profile.
Because remember, this is need-based financial aid that you're applying for. So the schools do want to be able to offer this to the neediest of students.
Right.
You know, and in many schools, we understand that the finances of a family change. And, you know, when you complete the FAFSA, when you complete the CSS profile, it's just a snapshot of your financial details at that moment in time. So that's why we reassess eligibility on an annual basis, because we understand that, you know, the details of your family will change. So every year, we're going to reassess eligibility because we understand that, you know, things change. We understand that.
So like the second year, do you only submit changes, or you got to redo the whole thing?
You have to do a new application every year to be considered.
Okay.
And if you have any special circumstances, you know, special circumstances cannot be documented on the FAFSA. They can be documented, you know, on the CSS profile. But if you have any special circumstances, you know, I would recommend that you contact the financial aid counselor at the school that the student is applying to.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Also, counselors, someone is asking that you please reshare the Google Classroom link.
Okay, so we can't really reshare the link. They can contact individually. There's been an issue with Google Classroom for that, but the student can sign on and show you their stuff.
Great.
And if you have any additional questions that you would like to ask me directly, just email me, especially about the CSS profile, just email me and I will definitely answer any questions that you have. Because we understand that the financial aid process is complex, but we understand that the CSS profile is a much more complex application as well. So if you have any questions about the CSS profile, I believe I put my email address in the chat. I'll do it again. Just shoot me an email and I'll answer any questions that you have.
And then the last question, can we get a copy of tonight's presentation? Yes, I'm going to be providing a copy of the presentation to Ms. Bruno, and Ms. Talbert will as well. And then I'll also be sending her a recording of our presentation.
Is
The
that
one-
I'll have our PR and marketing person send it out to an email to all the parents.
Great.
So one last call for questions about the FAFSA or the CSS profile. Okay, I think that's it. So if there are no further questions, thank you for all your questions. They have been much